Hi, everybody. Again, it's Cheryl Grant. I'm Director of Social Networking for the Haystack MacArthur Foundation Digital Media and Learning Competition. Haystack administers the competition, which this year is the Badges for Lifelong Learning competition, and we are partnered with the Mozilla Foundation. And fortunately have Carla Casilli, Project Manager of Open Badges at Mozilla, joining to host this webinar today. I'll be moderating questions, but before we get to questions, Carla's going to walk us through the badge systems model and design slides that she's prepared. And as usual, for those of you who have joined us in previous webinars, if you want to participate in real-time social, our Twitter hashtag is DML badges. Or if you would like, you can submit questions via the chat box through the GoToMeeting platform. And we're going to be archiving the webinar with our other ones. Keep track of us on the blog on dmlcompetition.net. We've got all of our webinars archived there, and this one will go up there as well. Before I introduce Carla, I wanted to just mention this is the 6th of our series of 6 webinars. And just to make sure that everyone receives fair treatment, we won't be giving feedback that is specifically about proposals, but any general questions we're more than happy to address. And if we have questions that are a little bit off topic, to make sure that we address questions and give people time who are here for the theme of today's webinar. If you have something that might be a little bit off topic, we're going to encourage you to submit your questions to the contact box on dmlcompetition.net so we can get it to the right person. So let's go ahead. I want to introduce Carla. Again, Carla is the project manager for the Open Badges initiative at the Mozilla Foundation. And Carla, I'm going to let you take it over. We might be having some muting.
Great, thanks so much, Cheryl. Can everyone hear me?
Okay, good.
Oh. Okay.
I can hear you fine.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, great. So I just wanted to go over the work that we have been considering, the Stage 2 preparation, badge systems, models, and design, and just want to ensure that everybody can see my screen. And today we're going to be talking about badge system models and characteristics of badge systems, and we'll talk about some best practices, and we'll also go over design. And then we'll also cover some examples about the work that Mozilla has been doing in partnership with peer-to-peer university. So thanks everybody for attending today. So today we're going to be talking about Stage 2. Stage 1 concluded on November 14th, and Stage 2 actually kicks off on December 12th. And the content from Stage 1 is informing the content from Stage 2. And Stage 2 is really about badge system proposals. And while everybody gets really excited about the term design, I at this point would like to have everybody focus on the idea about badge systems. And those are going to be aligned with the content from Stage 1, the winning submissions, and along with collaborator content. And there's a little kind of a slight quirk in Stage 2 is that you can actually present badge systems that you have designed with your own content or demo your idea, but eventually what happens in Stage 3 is we bring everybody back to Stage 1 content. So if you're a Stage 2 winner and you presented your own content, Haystack will work with you in order to re-team together a group that would focus on Stage 1 content, winning content from Stage 1. And let's talk about badge systems. Now, badge systems obviously encompass the idea of badges, and behind that there are a few things, and we're going to be talking about them as I talked about the whole idea of badge systems and the idea of the characteristics that are embedded within that, and then the thinking about the design that goes into that as well. So as we think about a badge system, some of the things we want to think about are assessments and criteria, and then if there are technologies or environments or platforms that are associated with that criteria or associated with the learning and involved, then what are the things that are embedded within that? And just to kind of FYI, it is not necessary to work out all the details that are involved in the badge system, so your designs do not have to be perfect. The technology thinking does not have to be, down to the code. You just need to essentially propose ideas in this situation. Very similar to the way that Stage 1 worked, where there was proposals of concepts of what might make good badge systems. Here it's the same idea. It's the extension of that. What might make good badge systems, taking that content and using that. And the thing that's kind of underpinning all of this conversation is the Mozilla OBI, and OBI essentially stands for Open Badge Infrastructure. And that is really the plumbing, the way that we refer to it. And that's the software that allows all of the content, all of the badges to kind of move freely throughout an ecosystem. So within that, what defines the Open Badge Infrastructure is a standard or specification of badges and repositories. And I'll go into a little bit more detail as we continue about what the spec is that is embedded in the metadata that's associated with the badges. And at the end of the competition, all of the badge systems will plug into the OBI, so it'll help to build a large and useful ecosystem so that everyone can benefit from it. One of the primary things that we request is that all of the badges be interoperable, or the badge systems be interoperable. And I'll step through what we mean by interoperable in just a minute. But the idea really is to extend value beyond just a single badge system, so that if we can start to have an organic ecosystem develop, then all of a sudden all of the badges start to have different levels of value, and we start to see kind of a currency and a kind of a social currency that develops out of the badge systems. So that's kind of the thinking that has gone into the OBI right now. So let's talk about what we mean by interoperability. So it's a pretty big word, and essentially what is inherent in that is that there's a metadata specification. And what that means is that essentially we're asking the badge designers to consider putting into, not just consider, but to put into several aspects, into the badges, several aspects of the content. And those are things like stuff you see on the screen, essentially, who the recipient of the badge is, who the issuer is, when it was issued, why the badge exists, and is there evidence that's behind the badge? Is there a URL where someone can actually reference some of the learning or the competencies and skills that are associated with that badge? So that's the metadata that's embedded in all the badges. So badges are not just visual representations, really. They're full kind of mini portfolios in a sense. And then also what we mean by interoperability is taking technology and being able to push badges into the open badge infrastructure. So what that means is that badges will default to private, and then there will be widgets and little pieces of software essentially that will allow people, recipients, to push badges into the open badge infrastructure and then enter the ecosystem. Related to that, there's also an authentication pathway, and what that means is essentially that when an issuer issues a badge, it allows an organization like a displayer to kind of ping back on that badge and say, is this badge valid? Did you really issue this badge? Is this the person that you issued the badge for? So again, it's the idea of taking that metadata and making sure that there's validity behind the badge. So that's kind of what we mean about interoperability, and what's important here to consider is that interoperability is something kind of a long-term concept, so it's not necessarily that you have to be completely interoperable for the concept to enter stage 2. Instead, think about it as something that should underpin the thinking. So recognize that there will need to be, down the road in stage 3, there will need to be interoperability with the open badge infrastructure. So it's really just providing you a thought, something to think about as you move forward in the badge designs. So let's now step back and take a consideration about some badge system models. And the ones I'll talk about today, there are really 3 primary models I'll talk about. Now, obviously, this is not a comprehensive list, and there are a variety of badge system models out there, but these are representative, and they might be good templates for you to start thinking about, or good prototypes for you to start considering as you consider badge design, your badge system models. If you've never designed a badge system model before, and I'm guessing probably a lot of you haven't. So the 3 that I'll talk about today are the training and leveling systems, and then dynamic dossier systems, as well as social systems. And those are the 3 you see arrayed on the screen right now. So the first is training and leveling systems, and these are primarily, they're skill-based. So can you accomplish a certain technical skill, not necessarily recognizing soft skills here. So is there a clear criteria for reward? Are people having to achieve a certain level of representation of learning in order to get a badge? And so they're mostly hard skills. And in this instance, they're also indicating kind of, is there a trajectory that people are following? Do they have to achieve one skill before they can move on to another kind of skill? And also, do the skills expire? Are these kind of just skills that just have validity for a short while. So in this instance, we're showing you peer-to-peer university, a screenshot of them, and a JavaScript. How long is JavaScript a useful tool? How long can you say that it's still a valid, the learning behind that is still valid? And some examples of that and these are kind of, so you can start thinking about badge systems that are not necessarily digital. First aid training is a good example, and it's something that expires. Your first aid training only lasts for between 1 and 3 years, I think. And then scuba diving certification. How long are you certified for something along those lines? But moving to the digital realm, at this point, peer-to-peer university, the School of Webcraft, how long does the badge that you're issuing, how long is it useful and valid before you can no longer say that that information is stale? Also, Khan Academy issues badges that work this way. The dynamic dossier is essentially used to track kind of ongoing performance. And what that means is that it's really good for competitions and really good for or kind of pitting people against one another so they can see themselves moving across a system. And in this instance, we can think of them as data rich. They're really informative. They provide a lot of feedback that people can use in order to assess themselves. And they generally sometimes have kind of rich representations of the achievements so far. And examples of these are Stack Overflow and Topcoder. And this is an example of Topcoder. And so from here, it's recognizing that again, these are for competitions, and or they work pretty well for competitions. They're not solely for competitions, but they're really kind of comparative in that way. If we take a look at social systems, I think this might be the one that people are probably most familiar with. And this is probably, this is to recommend kind of a community interaction and to recognize peer learning or peer assessment. And this is a screenshot of Stack Overflow. And in this instance, it's a reputation system. It's a reinforcement of community values. So this provides an opportunity to start thinking about what are the values that your organization truly would like to see repeated and enhanced and recognized. And some examples to consider here are Stack Overflow and Gowalla. And so this gives the opportunity for social rewards and recognition from peers, so not necessarily just top down, but also, are you a great commenter? Are you a good benefactor? And these are some of the lists on the Stack Overflow image. Are you a good critic? That's actually a really important characteristic. So this is kind of the three primary systems that we'll talk about today. And then what I want to move on to now is talking about the badge system characteristics. And these are characteristics that would inform those badge system models. And these are all available to you to find on the Stage 2 call for proposals on the DMLcompetition.net website. And they provide opportunities for you to consider as you're thinking through what you would like your badge system to encompass. And I will go through some of these, not all of them, but they're really kind of good things to consider. And obviously it's not comprehensive here. I mean, we can't cover every possibility within a badge system characteristic, but these are a good starting point. The other thing to keep in mind as you consider these is that not all of them need to be addressed. It's also possible to kind of just look at these and say, okay, well, we decided not to take X into account, and here's why. Because not all of these characteristics are useful in all badge systems. So again, take a look at the DMLcompetition.net because that's where the screenshot is taken from. So let's start going through them. And the first one I want to go through is the content and skills. So what is the primary domain that you're covering with your badge system? And what are badges that might be associated with that? What skills do you want to cover? Are there hard and soft skills? Are you just focusing on hard skills, or are you just focusing on soft skills? Obviously, we would love to see a combination of both of those badges because one of the beautiful aspects of the open badge infrastructure and even the concept of open badges is recognizing that not only can technical skills be rewarded and competencies and learning, but also soft skills, like as I mentioned a little earlier, are you a good peer mentor? And then other things to consider, are these skills discrete or are they continuous and ongoing? So start thinking about that. And I will go through some examples for the School of Webcraft talking about the characteristics that I'm going through right now. One other area to consider is scarcity and granularity. And what do we mean by granularity? Essentially, do you start your credential on kind of a micro level? Do you start to say, can you recognize the A tag in HTML? Or do you start to say, you're a great web maker? So micro level versus macro level. And obviously the benefit of badges is something that we like to encourage is that it's possible to be more granular and capture more information. You can get a little crazy in there. You can start recognizing things on really micro levels, but at the same time, make sure that there's a balance between micro and macro. And then how difficult, so a scarcity question, how difficult is it to achieve these badges? And obviously rarity generally indicates that there's some value inherent in that. It's the same idea of kind of the concept of diamonds, that it's the perception that there are very few diamonds, so therefore they have a great value. And the badges that you're seeing there are actually badges from Khan Academy. So sun badges and black hole badges. And some of them are actually, and this is an interesting aspect to consider as well, some of them are actually not indicated in any way. So you get the badge, it's kind of a stealth badge that you get the badge awarded to because you've achieved all these things and not necessarily recognize that you're moving toward that badge. And that's something to keep in mind as well. There's different opportunities to award badges. Then what about the levels? Are there levels to your badges? Are all your badges kind of flat? Does everybody kind of achieve the same thing? Or do you have a hierarchy of badges? Do badges aggregate in any way? Do people have to have prerequisites of one type of badge in order to move to the next type of badge? Can people scaffold off of badges that might already be extant in the system and then build from those? And then what badges get pushed to the open badge infrastructure? And the open badge infrastructure is something that I will continue to talk about throughout the entire webinar today. Because that's really how everything's plugging back in and the software that's making everything possible at this point. And then what is the pathway that your badges encourage or support? So what's the value system underneath all of the badges? And this is interesting because it can become both iterative and recursive, and that you start to think about what kind of things you'd like to assess and see, and assessment is a continual process. And then recursive from the standpoint of that as you start to develop your badges, you start to get interesting feedback that can also start to modify what it means for your organization to move forward. So role/identity and opportunities. So this is a really fascinating opportunity here for people to start to say, what are the identities that badges represent? Or can we start to define different areas for people to start talking about themselves and thinking about themselves? And related to that, what are narratives that people can start to weave around badges? What are the stories that people can either tell themselves about badges, or that they can start to see that there are pathways with the badges? So starting from one badge, can we move to another? And then what are opportunities or privileges that might be unlocked by badges? So in a similar way to the idea of stealth, there can be an opportunity to move ahead. So in some ways this is a game mechanic, and that you're thinking about what are ways that we can increase learning or encourage learning. Then performance and assessment, so what are the criteria that are behind this? Then how will that criteria be assessed? And this is an opportunity for crossover from the stage 1 content and start to doing some modeling around the learning. And remember that the criteria page and the URL that I mentioned a little earlier about the evidence URL, that's really the same idea. So what is the area, what is the criteria, and then can you document that? Is it possible to have a URL that documents that learning? And what we're showing you here is the peer-to-peer university JavaScript badge challenge that I'll talk about in a little more time as well. The sense of permanence. What does it mean to have badges? Are they permanent? Do they expire? Could someone renew a badge? And getting to the idea of here, we're showing you skill badges and then also community and peer badges. Perhaps community and peer badges don't expire, but maybe your skill badges do. Portability and transparency. So this is a really fascinating opportunity too to start thinking about what's the value within your community, and then what's the value outside of your community. And it's possible to have badges that have meaning, that are meaningful within a community that are not necessarily meaningful outside of that community. And this is, I think, one of the wonders, I think, of the OBI as well, is recognizing that it's possible to have meaning that is inherent in certain systems, and a lot of these may be social in some ways, but also recognize that that meaning doesn't have to translate, but it's fantastic if it does. And so that gets to the larger question is, what's the ultimate goal with the badges? So why are you actually starting to implement the badge system? So what is the thinking behind that, and what are you hoping to achieve? And then what kind of value is exchanged or communicated? So once your badges get pushed into the OBI, what happens? How does that start to help both the larger population, but also how does that start to help your group or organization? From a protection standpoint, you're kind of safe here because the OBI actually helps out, and that there is assessment built into the process, and that you want to consider to make sure that there's a balance between the gaming that is probably going to happen in some level, and gaming is not necessarily a bad thing. It indicates that there's value in the system, but also recognize that what are ways that you can start to think about to prevent gaming. So is it possible to have that evidence URL start to replace the idea of, or start to negate the idea of gaming? So here you actually can always point back to learning or skills or achievements that people have done directly. And one thing that we also like you to consider here, and I love this graphic of the +1, would endorsement add value? And endorsement would be organizations that wouldn't necessarily develop their own badge systems, but they might want to endorse a badge system that you have developed. So who might be some of those organizations that it would be fantastic if they endorsed the badge system that you're designing? And what criteria might they be thinking about for endorsement? And this is built into the open badge infrastructure. So the idea of endorsement as a third party is really a wonderful characteristic that it's possible for you to embed that into your proposal. Please do so. And that helps everybody because we can start to see where the ecosystem has a lot of benefit and where it can use some building out as well. Now we get to design, and we kind of have put design at the end because I think everybody tends to immediately think about the graphic idea of what a badge might look like, but at the same time here we're trying to use design in the broadest possible sense. So design as the system, and then also the visual or graphic design associated with that. So what do your badges look like? And is there an overall visual theme? Is there branding associated with your badges? And then how might those move forward? So starting from one badge system, can you think long term? Can you imagine what it might be as you start to introduce more and more badges into the system? So in some ways you want your initial badge designs to be fairly flexible so that it can accommodate some change as you move along. Also getting to the idea of the team, badge systems are very complex to design, and I don't want to understate that. So there are lots of people who are involved in designing a badge system. And some of those I'll talk a little bit about in just a few minutes about how we thought about that with peer-to-peer university. So who might make up your implementation team? Would they be coders? Would they be designers? Would they be assessment people? And then where might there be gaps? And it's perfectly okay to not have everybody covered in your proposal, because as you move forward, if you're selected as a winner in stage 3, that would be when some of the funding that you would get would start to help. So if there are people you need to add into the team, that would be part of the budget you would be considering as you move forward. Then technology. So what are the platforms or the systems that might be useful or might be effective for the development of your system? And then interoperability, again, with the OBI, thinking about that, not necessarily fully addressing it, but recognizing that you will be plugging into an open badge infrastructure. And then if you are moving ahead and you have great ideas for software or widgets, please, we are definitely open to them. So please go ahead and propose those. And likewise, you can always take a look at the work that we're doing right now at our GitHub site, and I can provide a link to that a little later. So let's step back and start thinking about what it means to the example. So taking those characteristics and then adapting that. And here we're taking a look at a screenshot of the School of Webcraft, which is essentially a partnership between peer-to-peer university and Mozilla. And peer-to-peer university is a peer-based social learning model in which people kind of teach themselves. So there's not necessarily any kind of top-down thinking here. It's really peer-based learning. And so we took that concept and we thought, okay, how can we start to develop out what it means to be design a school of webcraft, and then how can we assign badges within that? So the way that we started from that was actually we started developing a series of challenges, and here I'm actually showing a screenshot of different kinds of courses that are available on peer-to-peer university. So aspects that might ultimately feed into the School of Webcraft, but here this is just kind of areas that people could consider moving forward. And then, so we thought about content and skills, and when we did that, we thought about maybe there's two different kinds of badges here. So there's skill badges, and those are kind of hard skills, and then there are soft skills or community and peer badges. And hard skills in this instance were kind of things that are kind of quantifiable, easily quantifiable. So Mozilla JavaScript, and then PHP badges, and then also open source badges. But on the soft skill sides, we actually did quite a bit of thinking, and these are all actually peer-assessed badges. So it means that there might be 3 to 5 people who would have to say, you're good at this before you got awarded this badge. And then those are situations like peer mentor, or problem solver, an innovator, or good communicator, or maybe you're a great community builder. So all of those are aspects that can build into what you're starting to think about a badge system. And this is something that you can think about too if it's not necessarily cleanly pointed out or noted within the content from stage 1 for the collaborators or even from the competition winners, then that's actually something you can recommend in stage 2, that maybe you want to consider this kind of badge so you can actually put an adjuncts to the content for stage 1. Then from our standpoint, what is scarcity granularity within the School of Webcraft? So we did a lot of thinking about this, and we thought we didn't go as granular as we could have, and that was a conscious decision. We actually went with a higher level for our pilot so that we could build back in the granular assessment. And some of that may be something that you start from a stage 2 proposal, that you start with higher level badges but recognize that perhaps lower level badges will eventually slot in. So it might be easier to think on a kind of a macro level at this point and then move to a micro level as you either move along or once you move to stage 3. Also, and this directly ties into the level of granularity, the levels here were a matter of basic versus expert, and that is a really binary distinction and not necessarily one we recommend. But again, it was the idea of oversimplifying for the pilot so that we had more room for levels as we moved through, and eventually something would build to a Web Making 101 badge. So it is possible to have badges that build upon one another and then result in a higher level badge. Roles and identity, again, same idea, basic versus expert, really simplistic approach here. But in order to get to expert, you actually had to get reviewed by what we called gurus. And those are people who had already gone through the system. So this is something you can think about as well, is can you start to have either peer assessment, or can you start to have assessment that builds upon one another, so that in order to get to one level, you need to be assessed by people who've already gone through that level. And in this instance, performance and assessment, I'm showing you what the badge challenges that were assigned here. And I'm actually going to move to the next page because performance and assessment, so in particular we looked at the JavaScript basic badge challenge here. We're looking at that on screen. And we developed challenges that people had to finish in order to get assigned a badge. So they actually might have had 5 challenges that built to 1 badge. And that's something you can think about as well, as is that there's an opportunity to start having challenges that build to badges, and that there might be, and this ties into the way that you build a hierarchy of badges. So do you have 1 badge with lots of challenges associated with it, or do you have 1 badge that is actually based on a really granular assessment? In this instance, we went with the challenges that built to a badge. The idea of permanence for when it comes to things like HTML knowledge or even any kind of web dev knowledge is really important. And so we thought a lot about this for the School of Webcraft. So we came to the conclusion that most hard skills should expire, but soft skills probably shouldn't. So from the standpoint of that, and in a little bit of a sense, the idea of a top-down hard skill for coding would expire, and then peer assessments, so are you a great community member or a fantastic communicator, that's probably fairly unlikely that the assessment would be inaccurate in a few years. So, so because these were alpha badges, we actually didn't build in any kind of expiration, but when we move forward, we actually will be building in the idea of what does it mean to either update these badges or refresh the skills that are behind those badges. Portability and transparency, that's the idea of making sure that it can move across the web, and so here and also the transparency is can you ping back and find that there's content behind each one of those badges, and obviously for the School of Webcraft, yes, you could do that. So here we're showing you kind of the flow. So you would earn these badges within the School of Webcraft, P2PU on the School of Webcraft, and then they would be pushed into the Mozilla Open Badge infrastructure from the recipient or learner, and then they would move into the badge backpack when they're pushed into the OBI, and from there people could move them out into other areas. So not only Facebook, but also different sites and also blogs. So how far out do you want people to start thinking about where these badges can be displayed? Protection, again, this is getting back to the idea of recognizing that is there content behind this data? So is there a URL, or are there challenges, or is there information that people can ping back or take a look at and say, oh, well, this badge actually is valid and it does have a reason for existing. Endorsement, obviously, for the School of Webcraft, Mozilla endorsed the badges, but moving forward, it's something that, and obviously we're showing you the open courseware, MIT's open courseware. It would, we would love it if MIT would endorse the School of Webcraft, and that's something that we think about as well. And as we start to develop more badge systems, we can start to build off of and scaffold from some of the reputation. So the badge ecosystem starts to develop this kind of internal value that is coming from not only people who are, issuing badges, but also people who are displaying those badges and people who are, who are also recognizing those badges. So and recognizing them formally, and that's what endorsement is formal recognition and endorsement of a badge system. From a design standpoint, obviously we built in the Mozilla brand and the peer-to-peer university brand, and we also gave some thought as to distinguishing between types of badges. So skill badges were all based in red, and community or peer badges were all based in blue. And that might be something that you want to consider as well. Does it make sense to have badges have a certain shape when they're coming from a certain area or a certain color? Do they have certain kinds of type? Are there images that are associated with one kind of badge and not another kind of badge? And then is there iconography? Is there a kind of a series of icons that is associated with badges? And what might that mean? And what does it mean to start thinking about going down the line and either building on families of badge systems that exist, or what does it mean if you want to redesign your badge systems? Or if you start to see other badges that are really lovely and influential, what does that mean to how you can start to think about your badges as you move forward? So obviously branding is a huge aspect of this, but it doesn't have to control it. As you'll notice in all of the peer badges here, there actually is no branding assigned. So it's really just graphics. It's just an icon and some imagery. And that's something to consider as well. Can your badge start to achieve its own value all by itself without necessarily putting a significant brand on it? The team is something that I'm really happy to talk about here because this obviously was not a one-person job. We had a number of people working on this. So there was an assessment and curriculum individual. There was someone who was working on content. We had 2 developers. So we had a product/project manager. We had a community manager. And also this is something that is worth mentioning. The community actually fed into the building of the badges. And they're still helping us build the idea about what it means to have a School of Webcraft. So start to think about how the community can help feed into the work that you're doing as well. Obviously the technology here, we actually developed a separate site, a separate platform for the testing of this, and that's something to keep in mind as well, because peer-to-peer university, obviously we had the content, we had the people available to do that, but a separate platform and kind of a testing mode is something that is not that atypical. So please keep that in mind as you move forward, that tech aspect can be significant. So that kind of wraps up all the conversation that I've been talking about so far. So we stepped through the badge system models, and we talked about the characteristics and the badge system of badge systems. And we talked about some badge system models, training and leveling. We talked about dynamic dossier, and we also talked about the social systems. And then we talked about the characteristics that start to fill in and enhance those badge system models. Again, all of those characteristics are available on the dmlcompetition.net website under the Stage 2 call for proposals. And Stage 2 now begins December 12th, and content winner announcements for Stage 1 will come soon. We're hoping maybe by Monday or Friday that we'll hear Stage 1 winners. And proposals for Stage 2 are due the 12th of January. And again, remember the proposals will be aligned with the winning content from stage 1 or the collaborator content. And that's going to conclude the walkthrough of my presentation. And then I think we'll open it up for questions.
Great, thanks, Carla. That was fantastic. That's really helpful. We do have some questions, some that came in ahead of time, and also we've been receiving questions as we've been sitting listening to Carla's presentation. So I'm going to start off at the top here, and if you've asked a question and the answer doesn't clarify it, just participate either by Twitter or in the chat box and make sure that we can clarify the answer for you. So the first question that we'll start off with is, how can I guarantee that my badge system design will fit into the larger Open Badges ecosystem?
And that is a great question. So how can I ensure that my badge system will fit into the larger ecosystem? Well, this gives me the opportunity to talk about the idea that this is really, we're in a very large experiment right now, and everybody is helping to build on that experiment, and they're contributing. And so I understand the concern about making sure that everything is wonderful and perfect right off the bat, but it is a lot of pressure to put on everyone in order to think that way. So and I'm guessing at this point it's kind of a visual question. That's how I'm responding to it, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Visually, I think that there are going to be lots of different badges out there, and even from a technical standpoint, I think that there will be different ways to plug into the Open Badge infrastructure. And it might be that some organizations want to have their badges on Facebook, or they want to have their badges appear on LinkedIn. And so I think that as we move forward, some of that is going to be kind of answer itself. And as I mentioned too, that the concept of design is that it can be fluid. So the badges don't necessarily have to be perfect on the first shot out of the gate. Obviously, everybody wants to get them perfect, and that would be the goal. But please don't let that kind of stop you from getting somewhere. Don't let the visual aspect, or even some of the thinking about what might go into stage 2 prevent you from entering or slow you down. Because at this point, it's a large experiment, and I think as we move forward, we'll find more and more ways to solve this problem, and more and more ways to represent badges. And I think we'll start to see this kind of amazing kind of, the way that I think about it is we'll start to see kind of this blooming field of badges at some point.
Great, thanks, Carla. So the next question, we had a couple that fall under this theme of gaming, and the question reads, it could be hard to predict how people game badges. What should we be thinking about in order to offset potential for gaming? Could you give examples of gaming the system that we could use to help guide us? Would you speak more about gaming and trying to stop gaming?
Sure, absolutely, and I understand that there's a concern about gaming. And in a similar vein of recognizing that the badges and the badge designs might not be perfect right out of the gate, I think also becoming overly concerned about the idea of gaming might slow people down as well. And I mention this to kind of put it in perspective too, is that all systems are gamed, and even the academic institutions right now are gamed. So recognizing that there can be gaming, and yet there can still be great value inherent in a system. And so let me think a little bit about what it means to have certain kinds of gaming. It would be possible to have visual gaming. So it's possible for organizations or groups of individuals out there to essentially copy a badge visually. But because there's metadata associated with all of the badges, and again, I'll just briefly go over that. So it's the issuer, who the recipient is, why the badge exists, if there's an expiration date, and if there's an evidence URL associated with that. So essentially, you can kind of visually copy badges, but you really can't copy the metadata associated with those badges. So in that instance, you're kind of, and that's something that I mentioned, the OBI kind of covers you from that standpoint. Other kinds of gaming might be, the ones that I can think about right now are primarily about visual copying. Then I think that's the best way I can answer that right now. As we move forward, obviously there will be other kinds of gaming, and I kind of don't want to give anybody concepts about gaming. I don't want to encourage the idea of gaming. But the other thing to keep in mind is when people start to game systems, it indicates that there's value in that system. And that's worth keeping in mind. So the more value that we can start to bring to the table, then the harder it is to game that system, and then also the better the system itself.
I think that's a good answer. I was thinking about there's many examples of ways that people game that have nothing to do with games or nothing to do with badges, and it just seems to be a part of human nature. So
Yeah.
we'll let that sort of stand as an open question and something that people are going to pay attention to, and we'll move on to this next question. This one just came in, and it's sort of referring back to the first question. This person's thinking about elementary and middle school students playing a game that includes trophies and badges in the system. Can finishing one level in a game be considered as a badge, and would it be suitable to the Mozilla's badge system?
So that's a really interesting question, and in some ways the idea of game mechanics does tie in really well with badges. And so finishing one level, and it really depends on the assessment criteria that you're working from. And I can't stress that enough, is that we are not defining what your assessment criteria is. Instead, we're asking people to look deep into the organizations and recognize what it means, what's the value inherent in what it is that you do or you want to see, and how can you encourage learners to either access more information or work within your organization. So from that standpoint, yes, it's possible if you feel that that's an educational opportunity that you would like to see recognized, then finishing one level of a game could be a badge. There could be a badge associated with that. I'm not exactly sure what the evidence URL would look like, but absolutely it could be a portion. Or it might be that maybe there are several levels that people need to complete before they actually get a badge. Or there might be, and this is something that I would like to encourage as well, it might be that maybe there are aspects within that gaming level that are worth recognizing, and this gets back to the idea of granularity. So maybe there are really kind of basic skill levels that can be addressed within a game that aren't necessarily currently recognized. The best thing about gaming from an educational standpoint is the immediate feedback. So there's opportunities within games to do a variety of badges and recognize, and that's also where stealth awards kind of start to play a very interesting psychological role, in that people tend to do a whole lot more after they get a stealth badge because they're very excited and it was unanticipated. On the other hand, it's really important to show people what the arc of their learning might be. So to provide them with perhaps all of the badges that they might be able to achieve, removing, except for the idea of stealth badges, but showing them the pathway that exists for them so that they can start to either recognize that they want to move through that pathway or that they want to jump certain steps.
Great, thank you. The next question is very different. This one is asking, or basically starting off with a comment. There'll probably be overlap with many of the badges, especially for the 21st century literacy skills. So one organization's badge for X achievement may have different criteria than another organization who has the same achievement. Could you comment on the duplication issue?
Sure. And that's an excellent point. Yes, it is possible that there will be hundreds of JavaScript badges, or that there will be hundreds of math badges, or there might be different levels of assessment criteria associated with those badges, and that will happen. From the concept of the endorser standpoint, this is where the endorsers kind of come into play, and also where the value inherent in the ecosystem will arise organically. So let me talk about how it will rise organically. Because you can go back and ping on what the badge is, or you can go back and reference what the badge is based on, and if there's an evidence URL associated with that, people can go ahead and they can start to check to see, well, this badge looks like it was very onerous, like it was very difficult to get. So this badge obviously has more meaning for me as I look at it as a viewer than this other badge, which really only has an assessment criteria that's basically very, very simplistic. And as people start to move through the ecosystem themselves, and as people start to view the badges in the ecosystem, the values will start to shift around. And I think that's when I talked about recursiveness and iteration a little earlier, this is where some of that will start to come into play, is where people will start to recognize that there are that perhaps they need to build in more value to their badges, or they actually need to get more micro. They need to get more granular in what it is they're assessing. And then getting to the idea of endorsement, let's say that there's, let's say, 300 different kinds of like astronomy badges out there that exist in the system. And then all of a sudden NASA decides that they don't necessarily want to come up with a badge system for that, but they actually want to endorse, they want to recognize people moving towards that. So they want to, they might have an astrophysics badge. So this might be a step for them that they don't actually want to take into account. So then they can look at all the badge systems out there and they can vet them, and then they might select 15 that they recognize, and all of a sudden those 15 have a different currency, they have a different value in the ecosystem. And then the endorsers will kind of add, it starts to kind of knit together the system and bring different values to different badge systems. And this is where the opportunity arises for, let's say, traditional learning to kind of be a little bit disrupted, and that it's possible that there might be some community college out there that has an amazing, astronomy course, and that they get recognized by NASA. Or it might be that there's a group, or there might be an organization. So in this instance, let's say there might be an astronomy group. It might be a very small group that develops their own badge system and digital badge system, and they get recognized by NASA. All of a sudden, people would like to achieve that badge, or they would see that there's value inherent in it, perhaps more than other badges. So it is possible to be fairly disruptive in the way that the badges begin to work.
Excellent. Thank you again, Carla.
Mm-hmm.
This next question is a comment at the beginning, and it goes, we have student users as well and are concerned about privacy and security. Well, that's a good one. Every example badge we've seen uses an email address as a personal identifier. Are there alternatives to this?
And that is a great question. Yes, the Open Badge infrastructure is based on Browser ID, which is another initiative from Mozilla, and Browser ID is based on email addresses. And currently that is the only access point. That is the primary access point for the badges, primary reference point for the badges, email address. And it is something that we are currently in conversation with, and I think this is probably addressing both FERPA and also COPPA. So there are legal regulations that we are in discussion with our lawyers about, and also our beta partners are in discussions with people about, but it is a consideration. And it is possible that some of the badges would not necessarily be pushed into the Open Badge infrastructure. And that doesn't necessarily fully diminish the value of the badges, but it decreases them. And so if the badges start to become recognized as educational assets, then it is possible that they would need to be resident solely within the issuing organization that is issuing them. And they wouldn't necessarily be pushed out unless there was an agreement between that issuing organization and either the student's parent or guardian, or it's also pushed out through the student themselves. So FERPA is 18 and under, and COPPA is 13 and under, and both of those regulations are considerations.
Great, that was a really good question. Okay, the next question. Oh, let me see. Okay, there's a related question that just came in, so just to keep things categorized together, let's ask this one. Does Browser ID work with all browsers?
That is a great question, and I'm sorry, I actually cannot answer that one. So it is still in beta at this point, so Browser ID is still in beta, as is the Open Badge infrastructure. So we are still in the progress of building all of these things out, and obviously we would love it to, that is the plan, to have it work with all browsers. And essentially, so let me just kind of briefly step through how Browser ID works. Browser ID actually allows you to kind of use your email address to kind of log in across the web. So you only need to log in once. And so it's a reference point. And so instead of having to constantly log in and keep passwords for all these different sites, you would log in one place, and then that would be it. You'd kind of be covered overall from the entire web. And so Open Badge infrastructure builds on that using the email address. So you only kind of need to log in once. But again, it's still all in beta at this point.
Okay, I've got a good follow-up question to that. For people who want to pay close attention to the beta process, can they take a look at the Mozilla OBI platform programming framework and API?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because we're Mozilla, we do everything in the open. And that means that you can go take a look at our GitHub. If you go to openbadges.org, you can actually, there's a link out to all of our technical specs, all of our technical documentation. Then you can go to GitHub and take a look at all of the content that we currently have right there. We are working on the displayer API right now, and we are the issuer API is at this point pretty much finished. But and the endorser API will be coming, so all of that is still in progress. But please go ahead, absolutely. And the beautiful thing about, or one of the really beautiful things about Mozilla and the Open Badge infrastructure is it is completely federated. So you can take our software and fork it, and then do whatever you'd like with it. So it allows you to take that content and use it in the way that you would like. But remember that the value is inherent in the ecosystem itself. So if you do choose to silo your badges, and it is possible to do that, then some of the value of the ecosystem is diminished.
Great. Here's another related question to the OBI. We're on a running streak with this one. Does the OBI allow for badge transfer, similar to transfer of credits from one educational system to another?
So that's another great question. Yeah, the OBI is designed to, so the backpack, and that's something I haven't really talked in depth about, the backpack is really designed to be the house. It's to home all of the badges. So you can earn badges from all kinds of different issuers across the web, and they would be housed within your backpack. And currently, the design system right now is that Mozilla would be hosting that backpack. So it's possible to take badges from within that. And remember, I said they always default to private. But it would be possible to take badges and push them to certain displayers. So you can push them to, let's say, LinkedIn. You can push them to Facebook. You can push them to WordPress. And you can make them private on different levels. So all the badges you push out don't necessarily push out to them until you say, I want to push to WordPress or I want to push to LinkedIn. And so it is possible to yes, the badges are completely portable. That's the entire idea behind the Open Badge infrastructure, is they should be able to move across and be used anywhere or referenced anywhere. So thanks for that.
Okay, we're going to continue again with our running streak here. There will probably be a learning curve after we implement the badge design, and another learning curve when it integrates with Mozilla's OBI. Will there be a period for designers before things go live?
Absolutely, another great question. And that ties into the stages of the DML competition. So stage 1 concluded, and stage 2 is about to kick off. And after stage 2, when stage 2 winners are announced, then stage 3 is actually the pairing, the teaming up of stage 1 and stage 2 winners, in which they actually step through the process of what it means to, they think through as well as they can for 1 full month, so the month of February. And they think through what it means to plug into the system. They think through what it means to be working together as a team. And they start to look at what that team consists of and whether or not they need to add different people, different members to the team. And then at stage 3, when stage 3 winners are selected, March 2nd of 2012, then what happens the following year, they actually have 1 full year to implement that badge system. And that would be, at that point, they would be interacting with Mozilla directly, probably, most likely directly with Mozilla. And we will have a partner manager and a partner engineer who will work with the teams. And the partner manager will essentially work with people who still necessarily need some development on their assessment criteria or may want to still kind of extend that thinking. And the partner engineer will be a person who would help plug into the system itself. So there are kind of 2 opportunities there to think from a design standpoint. After stage 2, during stage 3, and then post stage 3 after the winners are announced, and that full year.
Great. This next question, I'm going to read it word for word because it's a question to ask you to clarify something. So this applicant is wondering about the line between content proposers and badge system design proposers, thinking that the items given in the overview today are criteria for a badge issuer system and that the specifics of what any particular content group needs are then choices within those criteria. So for example, what shape and color of a particular group of badges should they be for, say, plumbers? This would allow there to be an issuer who can serve many domains of knowledge. Is this on the right track?
Mostly, I think. If I understand the question correctly, an issuer can issue multiple kinds of badges. So it is not necessarily necessary that, so for instance, peer-to-peer university, right now we have the School of Webcraft, that's a partnership between Mozilla and peer-to-peer university, but peer-to-peer university can develop their own badges outside of the School of Webcraft, and they may be for things like cooking, or they may be for things like, remember, it's peer-based, so it's peer-based and peer-proposed. So it may be something along the lines of cooking, maybe something along the lines of music appreciation. Badges are digital these are digital representations, but the learning itself or the skills and competencies don't have to be digital. So yes, it's possible for an issuer to have multiple kinds of badges. Getting to the other part of the question, which I think there's a few questions kind of embedded in there, I think that the idea that the criteria, so the first stage was about content, what are the things that would go into a badge system, but the second stage is, I think, offering the opportunity for the assessment behind that content. So what does it mean to, and I'll just use a cooking example here. What does it mean to be to learn how to cook an egg, right? And there's lots of different ways to cook an egg. Or what does it mean to learn how to saute? Or what does it mean to be able to cook without a recipe? And those are kind of different levels that can be assessed. And also, does it, are you a fantastic kind of off-the-cuff cook? Can you take a look at all the things in your kitchen and just throw something together? So with a limited amount of ingredients, can you start to put something together? And in a similar way, you can start to think about badge systems like that. So while the content has been proposed, it is possible to still scaffold off of that content. It is possible to still modify or introduce different aspects of the content, or start to think about the content in ways that were not currently presented. So think about it as an opportunity rather than anything that's kind of constrictive. Think of it as an opportunity to start to develop and be as creative as possible about the way that you start to think about assessment. Because badges are an opportunity more than anything else to start to be completely outside of the traditional criteria and start to think completely outside of traditional academic assessment. And again, be very either granular or micro in the way that you can start to think about things. And you don't have to necessarily think about aspects as courses either. It doesn't. That's also kind of defaulting to a concept that exists right now. So what does it mean to start thinking about, okay, well, I know how to use, and I'll just use a random example here, I know how to use a pencil, because you can do a lot of things with a pencil. I can either draw a horse or, an animal, or I can write a letter. So start to think about simple aspects that can that build upon one another too. I hope that answered the question.
If that doesn't answer the question, go ahead. The person who submitted it, and we'll try to clarify for you. We're getting close to the end of our time here, so we may need to post something up on the blog. We'll talk afterwards and see if there's a need to do that. The next question is, how important is in the judging process is the aesthetic design of the badges?
That's a great question, and I'm actually happy someone asked it, because while I've been staying away from the aesthetic aspect of the badges, it is vitally important. And I've had some kind of external conversations with people about, well, if my badge system doesn't have an attractive badge, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so it is very important to consider the visual aspect, because that will be the primary way that people see the badge, right? That will be their first impact. So think about it from, as you do about any graphic system, what does it mean to think about the typography associated with it? What are the colors that, and what might those colors represent for your organization? Does it make sense to have a variety of different badges or one basic badge template that things build from? Can you distinguish readily between one badge and another? And that is vital, and I think it's one of those things that's really easy to make the mistake of having everything look kind of very similar to one another. So do you want your badges to stand out? So, and it could be that there's an unusual shape to your badges. What happens when badges start to be represented against other badges? Because in a badge backpack, you will see multiple badges, and on displayers, you will see multiple badges. And on social sites like Facebook or LinkedIn, you'll start to see badges kind of next to one another. So the visual aspect is vital, but again, since we're still early on the proposal phase, it doesn't have to be perfect yet.
Well, that was perfect, Carla. You actually ended, at least on my clock, exactly at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this webinar, and we'll be archiving it, putting it up on the blog on dmlcompetition.net. And of course, you'll probably see some things in Twitter on DML badges to show you other places where we'll post it. It was great. Thank you so much, Carla. That was really helpful, very useful, and I learned, I think, just as much today as I did when Aaron did it the first time. So thank you so much. Absolutely. So everybody else, thank you so much for joining us, and keep tuned in to what we're doing on Haystack, on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and on the DMLcompetition.net site. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.